It is not my desire to condemn, and I don't think this is a condemnation, because this is a condemnation-free zone. Because where the Spirit of the Lord is, there isn't condemnation, but there's liberty's joy. There's an understanding of His presence and our desire. So as we get into the message, our text is simply found in 1 Kings chapter 18, verses 20 through 46. But I want to ask you a question, because I've been watching the news a little bit, and the older I get, the less I tend to watch the news, and I long for the old cartoons of yesterday. SpongeBob does nothing for me. I don't understand his pants. It reminds me too much of Lederhosen. You know what I mean? The old German things. And I didn't like Lederhosen. I didn't like him then. I don't necessarily like him now. But here's my question. Are we allowing our walk with the Lord to be hacked? Now, I understand that the word hack has at least two meanings. One is a very positive thing, but the other one is negative. And hacking is something that happens. You're on your computer, you're working with your finances, the screen goes red, some message comes up, and the alarm goes off, and call your provider because you have just been hacked, and Norton and LifeLock are all coming together with $1 million pocketbook to underwrite the expense that you might go through. But so the question again is, are we allowing, for whatever reason, and in the environment in which we live, this political overtone that's taking place, are we allowing our walk with the Lord to be hacked by fear, by anxiety, by worry? Because you watch the stock market in one week, that may be two, but makes you want to just, 1,900 points. It just dropped for no reason, just because whatever. And so in this age of 24/7 news and the environment of social media, everything now gets life, and our fear begins to be heightened. So I'm using the word hacked not as a positive, but as a negative, because things happen. But let me start out with what I think is a funny story. I hope you agree with it. And recently there was a wedding, so this kind of reminded me of some anxiety that a young couple might go through. This is her special day. A young lady will worry about all the steps in the process of getting married, and so this young couple goes to the counselor. Her name is Louise. And Louise is kind of worried. She says, "Pastor, I'm worried. This is my special day. I'm going to get confused. I don't know. How can you help me with keeping all these things in my mind?" And the pastor, being an elderly gentleman, having gone through this many times, and even his own wedding, says, "Louise, let me help you. Remember the aisle." That's the thing that you walk down, and that's what we have here in the center. We have it on the sides. But remember the aisle. You're walking down that aisle towards the altar. This is this thing. This is the altar. You're going to stand there, and you're going to meet Him. That's your husband-to-be, and everything else will fall in place. So repeated himself again. Remember the aisle that you're walking down. Remember the altar that you're walking towards. And remember you're going to meet Him. And then the pastor said, "Would you repeat after me? Aisle, altar, Him." Let's get all these steps in our mind. Louise began to remember the aisle that she's walking down to, the altar at the place where she will meet Him. And then she begins to get comfortable. Aisle, altar, Him. And by the time she is done, I'll alter him. And that's the whole thing that marriage is all about. Something is taking place in that aisle, that altar, where you come to meet Him. We'll write that down somewhere. But over the years, I want to share with you, like you, I have learned some things. If you always want to stay on the good side of your spouse when you're having sensitive conversation, the answer should be, "Honey, you might be right." We're not taking a definite, we're just agreeing that you might be right. I've learned that old habits are hard to break. The older I get, the more habits seem to come out, and they're just hard to break. They seem to be my comfort level. But people always have money what they want money for. It doesn't matter what it is. We always have money what we want money for. Not a bad thing. I think it can be a good thing. Another thing that I have learned, people will always have time for what they want time for. And people support what they love, and they are faithful to it. This morning you were here, and you love church, and you are a part of it, and you're faithful to it. I've also learned that times have changed drastically. Now, I understand that I am not technology savvy. I have some thoughts of what I want to do as I approach retirement. In the olden days, I used to write newspaper columns. You know, I sat at the typewriter. Remember that little square thing that you hit those keys? You know what's really funny? When we pastored Good News Assembly of God, now Upper Deerfield, Hope Assembly of Upper Deerfield, we did the bulletin. The first half of the bulletin was in German. You know that typewriter that we got with a memory of 50,000 words? That thing would beep the whole time. Ginny would type up the German side. It would never beep on the English side. So I don't know if the typewriter was allergic to German typing or if it simply didn't understand what we were trying to do, but everything was a mistake until we switched over to the English side. I've also learned and observed that as a country we're more divided than ever before. I've also observed it's easy to blame others for what we are going through, even though we might be part of the reason. Today, everything is someone else's fault. But I do believe this with all my heart, that more than ever before in our history, we are fighting for the soul of this nation. You see, I believe that we need to have principles more than political conveniences. I believe that politicians are not pastors, and I firmly believe pastors should never be politicians. You see, the gods that run politics demand a high tribute of us who are affected by that. It's a sacrifice I don't think we as a church should ever sacrifice to. The text this morning, 1 Kings chapter 18, verses 16 through 46, is a reminder of what I think yesterday was and what today's time begins to look like again. It's the time of Baal. It's the time of Mount Carmel. It's the time of Elijah. It's the time of a nation being swayed between two opinions. Are the Republicans right? Are the Democrats right? I don't know who's right. One thing I do know, people are wrong and God is right. And when we do it God's way, we do it the right way. And when we do it His way, we will be blessed and we will be protected. Protected from the fact that anxiety is not going to be part of our life. Anxiousness will not rule us. We will not give up our hope because we know that the one that we serve is the God who gives us hope and confidence. I believe in the power of prayer. It's not just praying as a statement. It is that bended knee, it's that lifted hand, it's that lifted voice that says, God, you are able. And I apologize, sometimes King James just comes really close, maybe because I'm that old as he was. But thou knowest all things, O God. It's far easier to say sometimes that, God, you know everything that goes on, and I have confidence and I have trust. It has been said that a crisis doesn't make the man, it only reveals who he already is. I know the thought is both comforting and frightening at the same time, especially when you consider of all that could be involved, all that could be lost, our family, our health, our career, our life. Sometimes I wonder, would I have that kind of faith? Or would I compromise? I'll take you back to September 11th, 2001. The gentleman's name is Todd Beamer. You might remember him. Little statement, little plane, Flight 93 United, heading towards Washington, D.C. over Pennsylvania. And there was a decision that people had to make. All the people that lived on it were driven towards one destiny. And it wasn't a destiny of hope, it was a destiny of destruction. But they had to make that choice. And it was Beamer who said, are you ready? And now the famous words, let's roll. And so here you are. Everyone is going towards the front, towards your destiny. There is no way to escape our destiny. One way or the other, it's going to happen. Let it happen with grace and faith in our heart, our soul, our mind, being fully persuaded that He is able to do that which I've committed unto Him. Against whatever day that is. Whatever day my life on earth may crash, or I'm confronted with something I've never had to deal with before, let us be strong in our faith and our hope, our commitment to God, not wavering. Not being swayed between two opinions, but knowing for sure He is able. Then it says exceeding. Interesting word. Beyond all my fears and all my doubts, God is able. Would we have that faith and courage to know that we will never see our family again, never to hug my wife or for the woman to hug her husband, never to be at the job that we love, never to see our grandchildren again, because there is someone made a decision that is going to affect us and we have no control. Would we have the courage, would we have the faith, the fortitude to be there when it really counted? Whatever else we may have heard about Todd Beamer, this 9/11 did not change him. It only brought out what is here on the inside. There are many stories in the Bible that are so well known that when you mention a person's name, automatically a particular event follows that name. Here's an example, Noah. What comes to mind? The ark. When I say Abraham, what comes to mind? Isaac. When we say Joshua and the battle of, there he is. David and Goliath. Daniel and the lion's den. And when I say Elijah, this will come to mind. The crisis on Mount Carmel. I love history. I love geography. And I love the Old Testament for a reason, because the stories are not just moral stories, but they're incidents in a day and time of yesterday, but they lay the foundation that you and I can build on today. I live in an older home. We've done some modifications to it, but nonetheless, when you go into what I have called the basement all my life until I went to, with Ginny, we were in Wisconsin on a vacation, and it was a very exclusive part of town, and they had an open house, and so we went with my brother, who's a dentist, and we went to look at some models of the homes, and I saw a set of stairs going downstairs. I said, Ginny, excuse me, I get excited about these homes. Can't afford them, but I like to walk through them. But I said, Ginny, let's go downstairs to the basement. Well, the young lady, I didn't know who she was. Apparently she was the real estate agent. Said, sir, that's called a lower level. Being of a particular mindset and persuasion, using words I understand, because I don't know what a lower level is, I said, Ginny, let's go down to the basement. I think she understood. So I think sometimes there are things that are known to us, and so this morning as we look at Mount Carmel, this journey, allow me to take you there. It was one of the more popular mountains in the Old Testament. There are many mountains, 7 that kind of stick out in my mind. I won't mention them all. But if you were to ever do a study and you go on Google or something else, or like me, you bring out your old commentary sets, those wonderful books that have this little mildew smell to them. You know that smell? That's if they've been there for a little while. They haven't experienced it. There's some fingerprints, some thumbprints on there all over. There's some little lines of yellow, orange, blue, or black writing on the side. But if you look to it, then you understand that Carmel is one of these mountains, and there's 7 mountains. Every mountain is particular, so let's call them the mountains of God. Who here cannot remember Mount Sinai? When you think of Sinai, you think of Moses, you think of the Exodus, and you think of the voice of God, the hand of God, the finger of God, the stone tablets, everything falling into place. That God begins to give an order to things of how He wanted His people to conduct worship of Him. Who here hasn't read about the Mount of Olives, that wonderful place, that transaction between God, Jesus, and heaven? And He gives us this marvelous sermon, one of the greatest sermons that you'll ever read. Awesome. Blessed are. Don't you want to read that from time to time? It's not the newsprint, or maybe if you follow a particular newspaper or journal on your iPhone. But don't you want to read sometimes, blessed are? To be reminded that in His presence, that reading in His Word, that there's a blessing associated with reading His story. Then there's this mountain, this hill in the shape of a skull, Golgotha. Everything changed in heaven and earth. It changed for us. For whosoever believes in Him shall be saved. There is no salvation apart from Golgotha. There is that mountain in the face of a skull, and you can't avoid it. There it is. And we can't avoid Carmel because in the Old Testament it was a strategic mountain. It is right to the eastern side of Haifa, a city. And anyone who went to Carmel, you notice if you controlled Mount Carmel, you controlled the northern part of the kingdom. But on Mount Carmel, the priests of Baal and the Asherah, they knew that. And whoever built an altar on Mount Carmel controlled the religious attitude of the nation. And Baal and his people knew that. The Asherah worshipers knew that. You see, that's why the worshipers of Baal built an altar there. And the worship of Baal, when you do a study on that, and I want to share with you, the times then and the times now are so similar, it is frightening. But if you look at that religion of Baal worship, it's a bizarre mixture of idolatry, perverted sexuality, and child sacrifice. And the pagans believed that Baal controlled the rising and the setting of the sun. He was considered the god who brought forth the seasons of the year, the god who brought forth or withheld the rains. Interesting, isn't it? Now, because ancient Israel is an agricultural nation, Baal was held in high regard even by those who knew better. May I share with you the challenge of the day is to not be overwhelmed by what we face, but by the one whose face we have beheld again and again and again. Even in Israel, a nation dedicated to God, Baal was held in high popular demand. You see, he grabbed the mind and the heart and the body and the soul of the nation. Under the reign of the wicked king Ahab, Baal worship was almost swept the northern kingdom. Remember that Jezebel went about the business of killing the prophets of God. It's interesting what happens on social media. If you happen to have an opinion that disagrees with the norm, then your voice is being silent. I'm wondering when the law will be written and the door will be closed and this becomes a museum. And we might say it's never going to happen here. I thought that would never happen in Germany. Then a guy by the name of Hitler, and the church became a museum. In Eastern Germany at that time, before the reunification of 1989, every church was a museum or an office building. But can I share with you, it doesn't matter. Because in walks a man of God. His name is Elijah. Now Elijah means the Lord is my God. Interesting. And as Elijah came and met with the king, he said, I have come in the name of the living God, the God of Israel, before whom I stand. And I tell you, there shall be no rain in Israel, even no dew, until I give the word. Having uttered those words by the power of God Almighty, Elijah set about the Lord, and God sent him to this little brook called Cherith, however you pronounce it. But it's here at this brook that we read the story of birds, ravens, that came and would feed the prophet. God knows how to take care of us. Have you ever been so anxious that your whole body was shaking? That you couldn't sleep at night and you couldn't speak? So anxious that a second seemed like a long, long time. And when people tell you get over it, it really doesn't help. You know what helps? It doesn't take the anxiousness, but what helps to someone who's anxious, to have someone there who's willing to walk alongside of the anxious one. Not saying a word, just being there, just the presence of someone who understands. It is good to see someone who, like you, has a tear in his eye and understands there's a pain so deep that you cannot express it. And here at this brook, he realized that God has more than one way of taking care of his people. The ravens fed him. Eventually, the Lord moved him on to the Sidonian territory. Remember the story of the widow of Zarephath? I'm probably saying this wrong. But she had nothing except a little bit of oil, a little bit of flour, the last meal for her and her son. And the prophet of God has this unmitigated audacity and said, lady, before you take care of you and your son, I'd love to have a biscuit. Have you ever had hot biscuits fresh out of the oven? Do you know what butter does on that biscuit fresh out of the oven? Hot. And then you go and you get a jar of preserves, jelly, that Janet DeMarco has given you. I'm not saying any more, but I have a couple of those jars. It's my business every year. I'm advertising now. Rich told me to say this. I'm doing this. So every year when Janet has, and she opens up her house and she sells, oh gosh, those wonderful preserves, I guess you call it. My wife says, how much money do you have in your pocket? I say, honey, all of it. So I will walk away with 10 jars of this wonderful jelly. I love jelly. And I don't just put it on that biscuit. I pile it on the biscuit. You know, some people use a teaspoon. That's a waste of effort. For the same effort with a tablespoon, you get the right amount of jelly on that hot butter-soaked biscuit. You know what I mean. So God does know how to take care of us. And this widow, she trusted. Can I share with you, when you and I trust God in a time of things not working out, God does know how to provide for us. And she asked her neighbors, and I preached a sermon once in Upper Deerfield. I had everybody bring all their pots. I said, bring your pots and bring them not a few, and let's just see what God will do. God did wonderful things in that service. All I know is when we step out in faith, and faith is that sometimes indescribable. We don't know how it comes about, but we just take that. Oh, there's a movie with Harrison Ford, the Crusade. And I forget now which scene, but all of a sudden he takes this step into the abyss. He sees nothing there. And the moment he puts his foot on there, a bridge appears. This is what God does. He said, bridge over troubled water. Simon and Garfunkel, what a wonderful song. Advertising my music habits again. But you see, in the meantime, the nation is in trouble because there's famine. For more than 3 years, there had been no rain. The ground was dry, brown, cracked. Even the creeks were dried up and disappeared. The Jordan River became this little trickle. And across the land, the crops were dying, and the animals became carcasses in the field. And finally, God taps this little man by the name of Elijah, this mountain man, whose name means God is with me. Taps him on the shoulder and says, go to Ahab. And when the king sees the prophet for the second time, he says, is that you troubler of Israel? Why is the Christian always wrong? Why are we always at fault for something that happens? Why is it that someone always blames someone else for what's going on? Is no one responsible anymore? And then I look in one of those mildewed kind of smelling books called the Bible Dictionary. And when you look that up, the troubler of Israel, do you know what that means? The word troubler means snake. So here you are, a man of God, a prophet, called by God to go in the presence of the king, and the king says, hey, you snake. Can I share with you that mountain men and prophets never worry about what other people call them? And I don't think we should either. Whether we are deplorables or the radical religious right, it doesn't matter. We are who we are because of who is inside of us. But today, name-calling just appears to be part of the practice. Twitter, Facebook, everybody is called something. A day doesn't go by when the news doesn't talk about someone who has accused so-and-so and assigns a name to someone else. But I'm glad that Elijah didn't sit still for what the king said. He said, I have not made trouble for Israel, but you and your father's family have. That's in verse 18 of chapter 18 in 1 Kings. But you have abandoned the Lord's command and you have followed Baal. Before Ahab could even make up his mind, Elijah said, it is time for the truth to come out. It is time for people to decide. He said, tell the people of Israel to meet me at Carmel. It is a wonderful thing, friend. It's a peace of mind when we decide to follow Jesus, not sitting on the fence. Is he right? Is the Bible right? Is this right? Can I share with you that there is a heaven to gain and a hell to shun? There's only two places where people will go for eternity. There isn't a third option. It is either heaven or it is hell. Hell is not the place to be. It is not merely that place, that lake of fire, but the Bible says the worm, your soul, dieth not. It's constant punishment, constant reminder of having the opportunity to make a decision for Christ. And I want to challenge all of us that we've been sitting on the fence. Let's not. Let's decide that we will step forward and God is God and Jesus is Lord and He will reign my life irregardless of what the penalty is. When you play soccer, you take a risk. You can go for the ball or you can go for the player. I recommend you go for the ball. And when you strike that ball, the player may fall. So if the ump gives you that or the referee gives you a yellow card, take the yellow card. Don't go on Facebook complaining. Just take the card. But we need to get into the game and we need to decide whose side, what team are we going to root for? So everyone must make a decision. There are no other options. It's heaven, it's hell. Elijah told the king, send the 450 prophets of Baal and the 400 of the Asherah. And let's see who's God. But the God who answers by fire, that is God. I want to share with you that I'm looking for fire. Bible talks in the book of Acts about a fire that came and it hit people in a thing called the upper room, and they didn't know what was happening. The world didn't know what was happening. But when that fire came, it ignited them and turned them into something that no one had ever seen before. A boldness came upon them because of fire. And I believe in a faith that is fire-induced and fire-inspired. And it makes us do things because He is King and He is God. And God needs to burn away the chaff. Now, either Elijah was crazy or he was a man of God. You see, he didn't do what he did on a whim. Elijah learned at Cherith, that river he learned, and the Sidonian city where is Zarephath, the widow, he learned that God is God and God will provide. And upon the appointed day and time, he was there. So Ahab sent the word throughout Israel, and they all gathered together. And when Ahab talked about the Lord is God and follow Him, the people were silent. One of the greatest plagues that modern Christianity deals with today is the plague of spiritual indecision. You say today we are judged, found guilty within a matter of one tweet. It's no longer innocent until proven guilty. It's guilty until proven innocent. Today we have ideology over theology. But in verse 21, if you're there, if you're looking it up, of 1 Kings 18, verse 21, is a little word, two letters. It's a striking little word. It's the word if. Two letters that force us to commit one way or the other. Remember that song, One Way or the Other? I'm going to get you one way. Anybody there? You're probably not going to forget that tune now for a while, so forgive me. I didn't mean to plant it, but that word if means that God will get our attention. Here's why I love Elijah. He made it practical. He made it personal. He didn't say, if God is God, buy the book and read about it. He just said, if God is God, get on a team and follow Him. If Baal is, you see, he wasn't worried about Baal winning. He knew that God would. And he had a simple test. The true God would be the one that would came by fire. We can argue about what soap is better for us until you get into the bathtub. Get wet and use the soap. You'll never know what soap works better than the other. It's either Baal or it's God. We could use more of that kind of courage. I read on Facebook, Jenny shared with me, one of her friends or co-workers talked about maybe God would want us to pray less. and have a little bit more action. Can I share with you, we need to pray more. We need to believe what we pray. And then we need to put feet to our prayers. People wanted in that day and time, they wanted to play on both sides. The story is simple. The prophets of Baal were to cut the bull in half. They were to get the wood on the altar. Then they were to put the beast on it and stand back and see if Baal would answer by fire. But they danced and prayed. They cut themselves with knives and swords for 10 hours. They beat the drums to death. And I like drums. Where's Ray? There he is. It's my instrument back there. I can't play it. I love it. I like to feel the rhythm and the beat in my chest. So I like coming to the office early because I put on worship music. I have Hillsong. But if you ever came in, you would probably hear it in the parking lot. Because I like it loud. I don't mean anything by it. I just like it loud. I like to feel it. And then I sing with it. And maybe that's why it's loud, because I drown out my own joyful noise that is just a bummer. And in preparing for this, I took a look at another one of those books with mildew in it by Alfred Edersheim. Let me put an ad in here for Alfred. Alfred, my good German buddy. When you read his books, there is a depth of understanding to the man that is overwhelmingly positive, and you find yourself reading, and sometimes you lose time because Alfred takes you by your heart, by your soul, by your mind, and he weaves you into his dialogue that he puts through the text. But in reading about what happened on Mount Carmel, he said that the worship that was taking place on Mount Carmel by the prophets of Baal and the Asherah was like voodoo. It was a combination of insanity, where the prophets danced and screamed and beat their drums and lowered their body to the ground, and they bowed so low that they almost scraped because they wanted to show the devotion of Baal. There were some other things involved in that worship. It wasn't like a Wednesday night prayer meeting. It was the opposite of what we would consider calm. And they carried on for hours. Baal answer, Baal answer. Shout louder, the prophet said. Perhaps your God is in a deep thought, or he might have gone on vacation, or maybe he went around the corner. Forgive me now for my bluntness, but when you read that word that he is using, he said he went around the corner to relieve himself. Now, in today's time of political correctness, PC kind of thing, not personal computer, he would have been arrested for a hate crime violation. There comes a time when truth is truth, and the truth hurts. But here's what happens to truth: it does set us free. And when he does this, now the people get more anxious, and now they take out their knives and their swords, and they cut themselves and they violate themselves. You need to read Edersheim in order to understand what he is telling us. What happens when we're overcome by sin and we surrender to sin? We might say, well, it's only one little thing, but this little thing has a habit of capturing your imagination and pulling you into the abyss. And that's the danger of sin. There's nothing fun about it. It's pleasure for the moment, pain for eternity. That's the thing. And Baal is the god that drew the whole nation into this pain for eternity. But now let's go to the other side, verse number 30. I'm almost done. Here they were dancing and screaming. And now Elijah does, by design. And I need to let you know that the God of yesterday is God today. And the God of the mountain is God of the valley. And the God who makes the rain is the God who makes the sunshine. And the God who heals is the God who provides. If he can send a raven, God can send a basket of food to your door, because he is God. He may be silent, but he is present. And God will only be found by those who seek him. So when this friend says, maybe we need to do less praying, let me say it again. We need to do more strategic praying to seek his face And then we shall find him and we shall see him. And the prophet now goes and does a strange thing. He picks up 12 stones. Why 12 stones? Remember in the history when they left the land of encampment and slavery, when as soon as they crossed the Jordan River to the other side towards the promised land, Moses took 12 stones, each stone for each tribe, and he laid it down. And this altar, this is an important rail right here. There are stories that are written in the carpet, that are written in the floor, that are written in the things below this carpet. There is a pew, well, there was a pew at Upper Deerfield before the chairs came in. It was towards the back on the right-hand side as you stood behind the pulpit and you looked in the direction of the congregation. And there on top of the pew, let me come and show you what I mean. Okay, right here, there were sections missing. Because as the pastors preached in German, that may be a danger to preaching in German, one of the kids from the founding family of the church gnawed at this thing and ate this thing. Started to devour the pew, but right there, now that's memory. So just imagine being here and you remember when your son, your daughter, your niece, your nephew, you had a prayer, you had a need, and you knew that the elder came and they prayed for you, knew that God, right here. Here is the X. That marks the spot where God broke through. This is right here where I received the baptism of the Holy Spirit with the evidence of tongues. You can't remove that spot. You can't cover it up. It's there. You know it in your heart, in your memory. So here's what happens. The whole idea behind Elijah and everything that's going on is he wanted the people to remember. Remember when you came from a land that you didn't know. You were a stranger in that land and no one understood. There is a place, and this is the place, right here. And it reminded the people that there are certain spots and certain places that they need to remember and to be at because God will meet them there. The Jordan must be crossed. It was a sign. The timing was strategic because it was now time for the evening sacrifice. You know the story. You've read it many times. So they cut the bull in half, laid it on the altar. And this is the thing that amazes me because then he took 3 times 4 buckets of water and poured it on. So here's my question. Where did that water come from? There was a drought in the land for 3 horrible, long years. There were no creeks. Jordan was a trickle. Where did this water come from? Let me take you to 1 Kings 18:4 and 5. While Jezebel was killing all the prophets of the Lord. And you see, today there are people who deny the truth. Obadiah, remember, there's a book named after him about the same time frame. Obadiah had taken 100 prophets of God and hid them in 2 caves. And then it says this. And he gave them food and aquafina, water. Can I share with you, God will always have a source of supply. It doesn't matter what goes on or what the doomsayers are telling us. God will find something for you because He is God. It may have been a secret place, but I also know Elijah knew what Obadiah knew, and they knew each other. And therefore he knew where the water was, and he had water there. You see, Jesus had a secret place. And in that secret place, he met with God. If you've read anything about David Brainerd, and the city of Brainerd, Minnesota is named after him. Brainerd died at age 29 of a lung disease. But David Brainerd had a secret place. My buddy, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, had a secret place. And a lot of business gets done in a secret place. And we must have more secret places. So here's another question. When was the last time we came to an altar and we poured out our soul and we poured out our heart and we let God consume us by His fire and fill us with living water so we could go and face those situations that before this meeting at this secret place threatened to undo us? Isn't that what Luther says? In a mighty fortress is a God. Even though Satan threatens to undo this place, whether here or somewhere in your life, That is that place that gives you a bulwark, that gives you a wall so thick that nothing can penetrate. Whether arrow or missile of the enemy, it will always be that place. You see, there was so much water it filled the trench. He didn't need the water. The water was there to tell the people that this is not a trick. God was going to see it through. And I don't know how many words the prophet of Baal used in their presentation to get his attention, Baal. But Elijah only spoke 60 words. God has always been a God of few words. Simply let it be. Remember those words? In another book we used to turn, but now you push a button and it comes right up. There's something about turning a page. I know it's me, but I like page turning. And Kindle may even come up with an app where you can turn and hit that button and it gives you that page turning. And you know what, when you underline with yellow or orange, there is that scent, and they may come up with that scented app that when you underline something, it just kind of comes out. But there's something about that because it's that scent of the underliner that scores it in your heart and mind. I've been to this place, I read the text, and it's becoming alive inside of me. God didn't need the water. He simply wanted the people to know that God that answers by fire consumes everything. Finish that story. Read it in there. Because the fire came down, it consumed everything. The trench was dry. God will take everything you give him. Because if he doesn't take everything, then something of yourself remains, and that little thing becomes a big thing. Imagine husband and wife going to the doctor, and one of them is diagnosed with this dreadful disease called cancer. And the doctor says, we need to do surgery. And surgery is performed, and one of the spouses goes to the doctor. There's only one question that the spouse has in his or her heart, and that is this: did you get it all? Why do we have to get it all? Because if something remains, it can grow, and here we go again. And it is dreadful. And there are people in this church, and you have heard the dread, and you've experienced the dread, and you're dealing with the end result of that dread. But can I share with you, in spite of all that dread, this thing here? I'll alter him, right? That's what the young lady said, because she didn't want to mess up in her mind this very special day. This is a special day for someone here. There's the aisle. You walk towards the altar. It'll alter you. It just happened because God is in the altering business. You want home remodeling? It's very cheap. Cheap. Because you have to step out. Something has to be there that you can underline in your life, that this moment I made a decision. I'm not sitting on the fence. I don't want what I have. I want to get rid of it. I want everything gone from me. So I know that when we look at this, we look at the text, and these 850 people are killed. They're slaughtered. You don't want sin to be remnant in your life. You see, we must beware of a spirit of religion. There are only three things that Elijah asked for. Lord, answer so that the people know that you're the true God. Why wouldn't God answer that prayer? Lord, answer me so they know that I'm not just a fake, but I'm a prophet doing your will. The last thing, Lord, answer that the hearts of the people may be turned back to you. Elijah's concern was for God, for his work, and for the people of God. He didn't scream, he didn't cut, he didn't whoop and holler like I did. He didn't do any cutting. He simply spoke 60 words in Hebrew. Shalom Malachim. That's in there, the peace of God. And God answered him. And I think when you come and you consider all that can take place here, he'll answer you as well. The people woke up. They dealt with the prophets of Baal. But we need to understand God doesn't accept compromise. And 7 times he sent his sidekick to go and to see if it was going to rain. And then the Bible says an amazing thing on the 7th trip. I like the number 7. 6 is man, and number 7 is God. And on the 7th time, man came back and he said, I see a cloud the size of a man's fist. When you prayed and you see a little sign, it's time to thank God. It's time to sing, holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, and to honor him because the answer's on the way. It doesn't take much for God to be present. He spread the word. Ahab ran. He ran into a summer palace, and Elijah, as an old man, did what no old man should ever do. He tucked his tunic in, and then the Bible says God anointed him. He outran the chariot. Don't always put us old people down. We may not have what youth has, but we have experience. We have forgotten things, and we're accused of losing our memory. That's not it. I just decide not to keep all these things in my file. There's a delete button in my computer. I've exercised mine really well. It's right here. I click it, and the grocery list Ginny said, don't forget to bring the milk home, is gone. Let me close with this. When our son was visiting, he and I spent some time talking. And he shared a story with me that ends really well, but it had a sad beginning. One of the youth leaders that is serving him had a struggle. Had a struggle for years. But he said, it's been an endless cycle for me of weeks, during the week doing this, and on Sundays I come to church, I look for rest and peace, and God gives me rest and peace, and then Monday comes and this evil comes upon me, and I do what I said I would never do again. And then in a service where John preached, the title of the sermon was not on my watch. I listened to the sermon, I got the t-shirt, my son sent it to me. It's not enough to have the t-shirt, you know. But it's a reminder, it's an altar, it's this thing that stirs the memory. What happens when you surrender to God? And the young man came to the altar, walked down the aisle, came to the altar, and it altered him, it changed him. And now he's a leader, working with the volunteers in the youth group. When D.L. Moody first went to England, the first time he went there, and with this I'm done, someone asked him, the interpreter, the person that introduced him, is Mr. Moody O&O, the letter O and the letter O? And Moody said, what does that mean? And the man said, are you out and out for Jesus? And Moody said, definitely yes. So this morning, we're going to close, and Hillsong is going to come on. It's going to play right now. And in that service, in that music, it's maybe 5-6 minutes. It's Hearts Like Heaven. But if in that song, your heart is stirred, it's a very simple thing that happens. But it takes place as you step into the aisle and you wonder, wow, I wonder what people would think about me. In America, we have short-term memory. They'll forget by tomorrow. The thing is, God doesn't. So if you've been thinking about, I need to get closer to Jesus, let me recommend this. Get out of your seat as the song is being played. Walk down this aisle to this altar, and things will change. So